I never thought I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life takes such unexpected turns that you need to speak out, at least in order to figure it out for yourself. My name is Gwyneth, and at 35, I've experienced more joy and pain than I could ever have imagined. The world I once knew has collapsed, leaving me picking up the pieces and trying to figure out where everything went so terribly wrong. I'll start from the beginning. A year ago, I filed for divorce from Kevin, my ex-husband. Despite what you might think, we have managed to maintain peace and civility. Kevin was still a rich man, and he was generous in the arrangement. He left me our big house in the suburbs, where I live with our son Buddy, and an apartment in the city that provides a stable rental income. The house is beautiful, with a spacious backyard where Buddy loved to play, and the apartment is in a great location, which allows me to never worry about finding tenants. "Mom, when is Dad coming?" Buddy asked me almost every day with his big blue eyes full of hope and innocence. He was 6 years old, and despite the divorce, Kevin stayed close. "This weekend, honey, remember? He promised to take you to the park." I would say I'm grateful that at least this part of our broken family is still working. Kevin arrived every Saturday morning. His expensive car pulled up to our entrance at exactly 9 in the morning, never being late. "You're doing a great job with him," Kevin told me one day after dropping Buddy off. "I know it's not easy, but you're handling it better than anyone else." My own family situation was difficult. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old, and my mother remarried pretty quickly. I still remember the confusion when a new man suddenly appeared in the house, calling himself my father. Miranda was born a year later. My stepsister was growing up. Miranda and I have never been close. We maintained what I would call a politely detached relationship. Different fathers, different personalities, different lives. "Why don't you and Aunt Miranda spend time together like the other sisters?" One day during dinner, Buddy innocently asked me, poking a fork at the peas he was trying not to eat. I remember pausing before answering. "Sometimes sisters are just different, honey, but that's okay. It's just, like, how you don't always want to play with all the kids in your class." "But she never comes to my birthday parties," he pointed out, finally putting a spoonful of peas in his mouth. "Miranda is very busy with her own life," I explained, although the truth was more complicated. Miranda always seemed to resent our family dynamic, especially after my father continued to support me financially through college while her own father struggled to make ends meet. If only I had known then how these disagreements would tear our family apart. Looking back now, I see the warning signs. A subtle eye roll when I mentioned my new car. Ambiguous compliments about my happy marriage to Kevin. The way she suddenly became busy when I invited her to family gatherings at our house. "Your sister is just jealous," my friend Sarah told me that some people can't stand it when others succeed. I've always brushed off such comments, telling myself that family is family, and that someday we'll find a way to bridge the gap between us. How naive I was. Everything changed when my grandmother, my father's mother, died. She was a simple woman who lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the city. A place where the drawers under the windows were always overflowing with geraniums, and the old wooden door creaked just as it had 30 years ago, as if it had not come to terms with the passage of time. The funeral was modest but dignified, as if she had wanted it herself. What I didn't expect was that she left me everything in her will, the house and all her savings. I didn't even know she had any savings. "Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you," my father told me at the funeral. His eyes were red-rimmed as we stood by the fresh grave. "She liked the way you visited her every Sunday with Buddy, even after the divorce. She told me that this girl has a kind heart, like her dad." "I wish Buddy would spend more time with her," I replied, watching my son carefully place a small bouquet of daisies on the grave. He picked them himself in our garden that morning. "Mom, is great-grandmother in heaven now?" Buddy asked, his small hand sliding into mine. "Yes, honey, I replied, squeezing his fingers tightly. And I'm sure she's already baking her famous chocolate chip cookies there. I was still mulling over this unexpected inheritance when my parents invited me to their house. They said it was important, and I immediately felt that the conversation would not be easy. As soon as I entered the house, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The familiar comfort was replaced by a strange coldness. The house smelled of my mother's signature stew, a scent that always reminded me of my childhood, but now it seemed alien, almost intrusive. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table, the one where we had spent countless family dinners. I noticed scratches on its surface, the same ones that remained from Miranda's teenage years. Reminders of how we lived, argued, and grew up. "Would you like some coffee?" "What is it?" my mother asked, already pouring it into my favorite mug. I just nodded, cupping the warm ceramic in my hands, trying to keep at least a little warmth and confidence in my fingers. "We need to talk about your grandmother's house," she began in that special tone I'd learned to dread since childhood. "What about him?" I asked, already feeling my shoulders tense. My stepfather leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight. "You have to admit, you have quite a lot of property now. Kevin's house, a rented apartment, and now this." His words hung in the air, heavy as a threat. I saw my mother nod, tapping her cup with her fingernail. The sound was small but relentless, like raindrops on a roof. "Miranda's struggling, you know," she added, her voice soft, almost affectionate, but there was more to it than that. "She's been renting this tiny apartment for years, which is barely bigger than a closet. And her job. You know how they pay in the civil service." I didn't say anything, just watched as the steam slowly rose from my coffee, dying in the air. "We thought," the mother continued, "that it would be fair if you gave her your grandmother's house." Her hand reached across the table, gently touching mine. "You've been so blessed, Gwyneth," she said, her gaze penetrating. "It was hard for Miranda." After all, the stepfather added with an attempt at a convincing smile, "It's not a particularly valuable piece of property. You won't lose much. And for Miranda, it would mean everything." I was silent, feeling the words weighing on me. Their eyes were full of expectation, their arguments seemed well-balanced, and yet everything inside me protested. But the familiar feeling of guilt, imbibed since childhood, was no less severe. Yes, I had more than Miranda. Yes, the house was old, with scuffed walls and creaking floors. But he was mine. He was a memory of his grandmother, her warmth, her evenings with a cup of tea by the window. "Have you discussed this with Miranda?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the way they exchanged glances. "Well, we wanted to talk to you first," Mom said quickly, lowering her gaze. "But it's been so hard for her lately. You know, she broke up with that guy of hers, the one from the bank." I did not know. And I immediately realized how little I know about my sister's life in general. When was the last time we had a real conversation? Maybe at Christmas, and even then, just empty words about the weather and Miranda's endless complaints about her work. How long ago did I stop being a part of her world? How long has it been since she stopped being a part of mine? But I had enough worries myself. They didn't know that Buddy's health had been deteriorating lately. At first, these were barely noticeable signs. Unexplained bruises, frequent fatigue, moodiness. I told myself that it was just a lack of sleep, that he would outgrow it. The doctors kept saying that he was just a weak child, that some children needed more time to get stronger. But my mother's intuition told me otherwise. It was only when he started complaining of pain, when bruises began to appear for no reason, when any cold ended with weeks of recovery, that we learned the terrible truth. Blood cancer. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. Dr. Martinez's office. Warm walls, children's drawings that seemed to mock the seriousness of the moment. And the doctor, glancing over the results she hadn't wanted to announce for too long. "It's acute lymphoblastic leukemia," she finally said, carefully pushing the papers towards me. "I know it's overwhelming. But we need to start treatment immediately." I grabbed Buddy's hand, his little fingers trembling in my palm. "What are his chances?" I asked, not recognizing my own voice. "Every case is different," she replied evasively. But her eyes said more than any words. There was an alarm. And, it seems, there is already an echo of regret. We see some patterns that worry us. The treatment does not give the result we hoped for. And the long months began. Endless hospital visits, IVs, chemotherapy, nights spent in uncomfortable chairs next to my son's bed. Kevin was there. Despite the divorce, despite the new life, he did not take a single step away. Whatever it takes," he said, his voice cracking, and his habitual businesslike coldness melted away, exposing his defenseless father. "I'll make sure he gets the best treatment." I was holding on with all my strength, balancing between a hospital, work, rare short dreams and pressure from my family. Perhaps that's why, when my parents offered to give the house to Miranda, I agreed almost immediately. What was that house compared to my son's daily struggles? This decision seemed insignificant, almost not worth paying attention to. One day, between chemo sessions, I met Miranda. We were standing in her small apartment. I handed her the documents. "As soon as Buddy's treatment settles down," I said, already thinking about the next visit to the doctor, about the next package of medications, about how to control myself so as not to cry in front of Buddy. "Oh my God, thank you." "Thanks," Miranda exclaimed, rushing towards me. I couldn't remember the last time she hugged me. Her perfume was too harsh, sickly sweet, and I felt a little queasy. "I'm going to have the best housewarming party in the world." "In a month," she chirped, her face beaming. "You'll come, and Buddy, too, if he's fit." I nodded absently, barely noticing her joy. All my thoughts were about Buddy. About his latest analysis, about the pallor of his skin, about how he no longer asks to go to the park, does not play with his cars. And his eyes, those eyes that have grown too old in recent weeks. "Mom," he whispered one night in the hospital, when I was straightening the blanket and trying to smile. His voice was as thin as the rustle of dry leaves. "Am I going to be okay?" I looked at him and thought how he looked like an angel, with his transparent skin and soft, thin hair that was slowly falling out from the treatment. "Of course, honey," I replied, pressing his hand to my lips. "You'll be fine. You're the bravest boy I know." I lied. She lied the way all mothers lie, when the truth is a knife to the heart. For a moment, there was hope. Buddy seemed to be responding to the new treatment protocol. His complexion improved, he started eating more, even asked to play with toys again. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. "Mommy, can we go to the park this weekend?" "What is it?" he asked one morning, and my heart began to beat faster. It was the first time in months that he had shown interest in going outside. "As soon as you're strong enough, baby," I promised. "We'll go to the park and feed the ducks, like before." "Can we invite Dad?" "Of course we can," I smiled, hiding my anxiety behind a confident smile. And I believed. I wanted to believe. She clung to every glimmer of hope, to his every wish. But a week later, everything collapsed. The call from the hospital came at 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me from a restless sleep. Buddy had been admitted there the day before with a high fever, but the doctors assured him that it was just a minor complication, that everything was under control. But now the nurse's voice on the other side of the phone was too quiet and even. "Mrs. Peterson, you need to get to the hospital right away. Buddy's condition has deteriorated significantly." I don't remember how I got there. Everything was blurred by the rain, flashes of streetlights, and road signs. I passed 3 red lights, but I didn't care. The only thought is to make it. Get to him in time. But it was too late. When I entered the room, the doctors were already working on him, but I could see from their faces that the fight was almost lost. I stood against the wall, watching powerlessly as they fought for his life, clinging to every second, but every second was slipping away. The following hours became a nightmare. Medical terms, emergency procedures, attempts to stabilize. And finally, silence. A silence that hurt my ears. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peterson." "We did everything we could," said Dr. Martinez. Her voice was soft but broken. His body was too weak to fight further. I sat down next to his bed. She took his small, already cold hand and did not let go of it. I sat there for hours, trying to look at his face, memorize every feature, every curve of his eyelashes, every curve of his fingers. But I couldn't accept it. My son, my beautiful, brave boy is dead. The sun was rising when Kevin arrived. His face was ashen gray, and there was anguish in his eyes. "Chuck," he whispered, hugging me to him. "Oh, my God, Mel." Through a haze of pain, I texted Miranda. Just a few words that seemed to take my whole soul with them. "Buddy died. The funeral is in 3 days." The answer came in 5 minutes. Just one word. "Okay." No condolences. No words of encouragement. Not a single hint of sympathy. Only a cold, even "okay," as if I had reported something every day, devoid of meaning. The numbness turned to anger, but I still hoped to find solace. I called my mother. She dialed the number, pressing her back against the cold wall. I needed her voice, her words, her love. "Oh, yes, Miranda already told us," she said. Far away. Detached. "Listen, honey, about the funeral, we can't come." I froze. "What?" I gasped, not understanding, not believing. "What did you say?" "We have other obligations on this day." The world seemed to tilt around me. "Other obligations?" I repeated, convinced that I had misheard. "Yes. Miranda's housewarming party. I promised to help her with the preparation. You understand, don't you? These things take so much time, so much work. We've already invited everyone, and it would be too much trouble to reschedule." I felt my fingers gripping the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. "Mom," I said slowly, each word like a stone, "this is Buddy's funeral. We're talking about your grandson's funeral." "I know, honey," her voice was almost sympathetic, almost. "It's very sad, but life goes on, doesn't it? Miranda had been planning this party for weeks. We cannot disappoint her guests." I didn't understand. I couldn't figure it out. The world stopped making sense the moment Buddy's heart stopped, but this was beyond my comprehension. How could my mother? How could she choose a housewarming party instead of saying goodbye to her grandson? How could she make such a choice? My hands were shaking as I dialed Miranda's number. "What the hell are you thinking?" I demanded as soon as she picked up the phone. The phone almost slipped out of my fingers. "Why are you throwing a party on the day of Buddy's funeral?" For a moment, there was only a muffled noise in the background, as if the air had stopped. "Because that's the day I want to arrange it," she finally replied. Her voice was cold and too calm. I heard music coming from the speakers, thudding footsteps on the floor of her new house. "I've been planning this. All invitations have already been sent." I stopped talking, barely able to keep myself from screaming. "Miranda, this is my son's funeral. My son. Your nephew." The little boy who made you birthday cards every year. Can't you reschedule the party? Why should I? She snapped. I heard something crash in the background, like a dropped glass. It's just a funeral. He's dead anyway. He doesn't care when he lies down in the ground. I'm alive. And I want to celebrate my new home. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this? The words cut like a knife. The phone slipped from my fingers and fell to the kitchen floor with a thud. At that moment, something inside me broke. And something else, harder, colder, took his place. I remembered everything. Her promises to be there for me. Her feigned involvement when Buddy's illness was just beginning. The way she hugged me, told me I wasn't alone. Everything turned out to be a lie. Empty words. Buddy's funeral was a blur. A smear of black clothes, a whisper of condolences, ragged breathing nearby. Kevin stood next to me, gripping my hand tightly when I felt myself losing strength. He was like an anchor, like the last island in the ocean of grief. The mother and stepfather showed up for exactly 10 minutes. They looked awkward in their smart dresses, over which dark coats were hastily thrown. Mom didn't look at me. We can't stay long, she whispered apologetically. Miranda needs help with the preparation. I watched them go, feeling nothing but a cold, empty space where my heart used to be. Their car hadn't left the parking lot yet when I noticed my mother checking her phone. She was probably checking out the last details of the party with Miranda. Have you heard about Miranda's party? My cousin Sarah whispered to me at the reception. Her eyes were full of uncertainty and awkwardness. She invited half the city. None of us will go, of course. This is wrong. We told her, but she wouldn't listen. I nodded, but a plan was already forming in my head. Grandma's house was still mine. Yes, Miranda had the keys, but not the documents. Not the law. She had no right to arrange anything there. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, when I knew that the party would be in full swing, I made 2 calls. The first one is to the police. This is my grandmother's house, I explained calmly. People use my property without permission. I need you to come and help me resolve this issue. The second call is to my lawyer. Is everything in order with the documents? I asked, listening to his steady, even breathing. Yes, Gwyneth, he said. The house is still legally yours. No transfers were registered. Everything is fine. I arrived at the house just as the police arrived. The music blared, the singer's voice cheerfully talked about the holiday and the good time. Through the windows, I saw people dancing, laughing, and raising glasses. Miranda was in the middle of everything, dressed in a new dress, beaming. She played the role of hostess in the house that belonged to me. The police were professional. Calm, collected. Are you the owner? One of them asked. I took out the documents. My hand wasn't shaking. I pointed to the line where my name was written clearly and clearly. Yes, this is my property. These people do not have permission to use this house. They exchanged glances, then one of them nodded. We'll figure it out. And they went inside. I stood on the porch, listening to the music fade away, how the voices became concerned, how Miranda's name sounded pronounced in an official tone. She came out a few minutes later. Her eyes were glittering with anger, and her lips were pressed tightly together. What are you doing? She hissed, stopping in front of me. I'm exercising my legal right, I replied coldly. This house is still mine. You can't do this. You knew how important this party is to me. I stared at her in silence, and at that moment I realized that the woman in front of me was a stranger to me. So alien that it hurt. Was it important to you how important my son was to me? I asked quietly. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't respond. "This is my property," I said, and my voice carried through the sudden silence as the music abruptly stopped. "These people came here without my permission." There was an oppressive pause for a moment, and then the chaos began, which I watched with almost painful satisfaction. I watched as Miranda's embarrassment turned to rage, as her carefully smoothed disguised smiles crumbled, revealing her true face. Her guests began to leave the house. One by one, avoiding the police gazes, they made their way to the exit. No one wanted to get involved in a conflict with the law. Imagine her perfect dishes, beautifully laid out on festive tables, left untouched. The jewelry she had so carefully chosen suddenly looked cheap and ridiculous against the harsh, cold reality. "But she gave me this house." Miranda screamed, and the mascara ran down her cheeks. She pointed at me in desperation. "Tell them, Mom. Tell them how she promised me that." My mother took a step forward, but I noticed her gaze flick to the police. They stood aside, waiting, but their cold, professional eyes left no chance for a lie. Without the documents, her words meant nothing. "Show me the documents," I said calmly, standing in the middle of what was supposed to be Miranda's moment of triumph. "Show me where I legally gave you this house." But there were no documents. There were no papers. There was nothing. When the guests left and the police did their job, leaving us alone, Miranda exploded. Her face was contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. "All this imitation of sisterly affection," she hissed, and her voice trembled. "It was all a lie. You're arrogant, ___." Her scream was like a whip tearing through the air. She knocked over a vase of flowers, and the water and petals spilled across the floor like blood. "You always had everything. A rich husband. A big house. Universal sympathy. I hate you. I'm glad your husband left you. And I'm glad Brad is dead." The words cut through the air like knives. They echoed through the room, leaving a void in their wake. I stood there, unable to move, unable to believe. I looked at my mother, expecting, I don't know what. Horror. Shock. Protection. But she came over and stood next to Miranda. Her face was contorted with anger, and her eyes were sparkling. "You've always been selfish, Gwyneth." Her voice was filled with venom. "I always thought I was better than everyone else. Just because you married a rich man. Just because you had a sick child and everyone felt sorry for you." It was like a blow. I stood listening to them, and I felt a cold, hard clarity rising inside me. I remembered. I remembered all those years. I remembered how I sent them money every month, $1,500, without delay. I remembered Christmas presents, birthday presents, little surprises, just like that. I remembered the cruise I paid for last year, the kitchen renovation my mother had dreamed of, the new engine for my stepfather's old Mercedes. I was paying for their lives, and all the while they preferred Miranda. All this time. "Let me make something clear," I said, and my voice was as cold and clear as ice. "From this moment on, the money stops. That's it. The monthly contributions, the gifts, the generosity you're used to, it's all over." My mother's face paled. You wouldn't dare," her voice broke. "You." I looked straight into her eyes. "You chose housewarming over your grandson's funeral. You're protecting a man who just celebrated the death of my child." "Gwyneth." Her stepfather intervened, his face flushed red. "Let's take our time. We're all upset. We say things that we'll regret later." "I won't regret it," I interrupted him. "I mean every word. You'll never get a dime from me again. Go away. Get out of this house. Get out of my life. Don't ever contact me again." "You can't do that." My mother's voice cracked, and I saw reality dawning on her for the first time. I can, I replied. Parents don't do what you did. Parents don't choose a party over their grandson's funeral. Parents do not protect those who celebrate the death of a child. You're just people. No one else. They stood frozen, and I could see the horror in their eyes. The horror is not from losing me, but from losing the comfort they are used to. Miranda threatened to leave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She always relied on the support of our parents, on their condescension and habitual protection. Now I've deprived them of their main source of additional income, and for the first time, panic flashed in her eyes. The next day, social media exploded. My mother's posts about the cruelty of an ungrateful daughter, Miranda's tearful comments about a traitorous sister who left her without a roof over her head. They made me look like a monster, cold and heartless. But they conveniently omitted the part where they chose a party instead of Buddy's funeral. The truth, however, did not linger. Our relatives and friends knew what really happened. They were at the funeral. They had seen the invitations to the party, heard about the preparation, which turned out to be more important than the last farewell to a 6-year-old boy. Who throws a party on the day of their nephew's funeral? My cousin Sarah wrote in the comments under one of Miranda's posts. And who helps to prepare for this party, instead of going to your own grandson's funeral? Shame on you all. The reaction was swift and merciless. Miranda's tearful posts about betrayal and cruelty were met with disgust and condemnation. Someone leaked information about the financial support I have provided them all these years. About the money I sent monthly. About the help they received in difficult moments. The comments became even more scathing. Miranda was forced to close her social media accounts when the story of her heartless celebration and her parents' involvement in this act spread throughout the city. People discussed them behind their backs, telling each other how easy it was to turn away from their own blood for their own convenience. Months have passed. I was learning to breathe anew, learning to live in a world that no longer included my son. Dr. Anderson's weekly therapy sessions became an island where I could piece together what I was feeling. Grief, betrayal, loneliness. I was learning to let go. It was only when I began to slowly recover that new news came. Someone broke all the windows in your grandmother's house, Mrs. Bennett, a neighbor, told me, her voice trembling. I heard the glass shattering. Thanks to the security cameras that I had installed in advance, I had clear footage. And when I saw them, I no longer felt surprised, only tired and cold, devastating disappointment. Miranda was in the video. She methodically walked around the building, her face contorted with hatred as she threw rocks at the windows. Bangs, screams, glass shattering like all that's left of our kinship. Despite the pain, despite the remnants of regret, I didn't hesitate. I filed a lawsuit. When my mother called me, her voice was full of despair. Please change your mind, she sobbed. You're going to ruin her career. She's going to lose her job in the city administration. Think about your future. I listened to her as if from afar. The same way she thought about Buddy's funeral. I replied and hung up the phone. Miranda was fired and the video went viral. The court ruled that she was obliged to pay fines and compensate for the damage. The last I heard, she was out of a job, and her name in the city administration now sounded like a curse. Her prestigious position is just another victim of her hatred. Some might call it cruel. But I didn't feel any remorse. Every time I visited Buddy's grave, I remembered her words. About my brat, about her party, which was more important than saying goodbye to him. Some things are unforgivable. Yesterday, in therapy, Dr. Anderson asked, "Are you thinking about reconciliation? With your family?" I looked out the window of her office, where the spring tree was beginning to bloom, and was silent for a long time. "They're not my family anymore," I finally replied. "The family doesn't do what they did. I'm learning to live anew, day after day, without them. Buddy taught me unconditional love. A love that doesn't die, even when your heart is broken into a million pieces. And Miranda taught me unconditional hate. A hatred that consumes everything it touches. And I realized that sometimes the family you were born into is not the one you will stay with. Sometimes the only way to honor the memory of those we have lost is to sever ties with those who dishonored their passing. When I sit in my quiet house and look at Buddy's photos, I know I made the right choice. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.